Hello there everyone, I'm back again, and today I actually have my main laptop. We're going to do something a little bit unconventional. This is a 2021 14-inch MacBook Pro. I got it in the summer of 2022. I've had it for almost 3 years now. We're coming up on 3 years, and thought I'd talk about the machine itself, why I got it, what I do with it, how it's aged, and how much longer I really expect I can be able to use this thing, or how much I want to, or how much longer I want to use this thing before I replace it. But I guess we're just going to get right into it. We're going to talk about the machine. Like I told you, it's a 2021 14-inch MacBook Pro that I got in 2022, actually a few months before the M2 version came out, so that was a mistake on my part. But still don't have any complaints. I still love it, and I'll tell you about why in a little bit. But the reason I bought this is because I was using a several-year-old, I bought it used, one of the Precision XPS Dell laptops. You might be able to tell I like those laptops. But I was using one of those and I liked it. It was great. It had a nice screen. It was fast. But the battery was not great at all, and it was pretty clunky, even for something in the XPS form factor. It was pretty big. It kind of sucked to bring that around. So I wanted to replace it with something smaller and something that had better or that had better battery life, especially because I was, and I still am. I am about to graduate, but I am a college student, so lugging a laptop around everywhere is a big part of what I do. So I wanted to have something that wouldn't die, so I wouldn't need to bring a charger around and worry about, oh, where am I going to plug in? And something that was smaller and more portable, but it was still a nice machine. And luckily at this time, I had just finished my freshman year in college, so I didn't have a lot of expenses, so I could afford to splurge on a laptop. So I got this for $2,300. It retailed at $2,500, but luckily Apple's education pricing program allowed me to get a $200 discount and a $150 Apple gift card, or Apple Store gift card, which they do that or something like that pretty much every year. So if you're a student and you're thinking about buying a new Apple laptop, or really I think any Apple product, they offer the discounts and the gift card for. Look into that. Look into their education store. That's something you should look into. But anyway, so this is not the base configuration. I'll talk about that in a second. But I picked up a Mac as opposed to another Windows laptop because I had actually had some previous experience using a Mac when I was in high school. I used it for about 2 years purely as my school laptop. It was not my daily driver. I had a Windows PC I used at home, and I liked it. It wasn't perfect. I especially did not like the butterfly keyboard. There were a few things I didn't like, but there's one thing I really did like about my time using that laptop. It was Mac OS. I personally prefer it to Windows. I preferred it then. I prefer it now. I actually don't have much experience with Windows 11 because I've just been using this. So I decided to pick up a MacBook, and I decided I would go with the Pro over the Air because I wanted the fast processor. I thought I'd be doing some video editing, which I guess I am here 3 years later. But I wanted it because I wanted the fast processor. I wanted some of the Pro features like ports that aren't just USB-C ports, and I figured, why not? I have the money. I can splurge for it a little bit, and so I picked this up. I already had most devices in the Apple ecosystem. You can probably see it right now. I'm wearing an Apple Watch. I had that when I got this. I have an iPhone. I didn't have an iPad at the time, but I do now, and I had previous experience using them on and off. You can probably see it right here. I'm using it for my notes. So that kind of contributed to the decision as well. And the reason I picked this device specifically as opposed to a different, I know they had the 13-inch MacBook Pro at the time that was in the old chassis. I thought, or this was new. I saw the reviews touting the battery life of the M chips and the performance, and I thought, this is great. This is probably what I need. I was a little concerned about the fact that I still did play a good amount of video games at the time, especially on my PC. And when I'm at college, I'm not bringing a giant gaming rig with me. So whatever I was going to play, I was going to have to play on my laptop. So if I got a Mac, which I have right here, that meant I was going to have to, or I was worried about some compatibility issues, and then beyond that, even if the games were compatible, not everything is optimized for the new ARM processors. Rosetta 2 is not perfect, so I was a little worried about that. But you know, I was and I still am a pretty busy person in college, so my rationale is that, you know, I'm kind of moving away. I'm not playing games as much, and the ones I do are, one, they're more so CPU intensive, which, you know, this has an APU, and I know they're compatible and they're not that intensive. I mostly play strategy games and then more casual stuff, so I was willing to make that switch over. But anyway, about the system itself, it looks identical to any modern MacBook. The M4 Pro, MacBook Pros look exactly the same. They use the same chassis with one difference. The space gray color, which I'm using right here, not using, but which I have. They no longer sell this. I believe they got rid of it starting with the 2023 MacBook Pro models, and now they have the space black color, which looks cool, I guess, but I like this. It's aging pretty well, which is good. This specific model, the 2021 model, wasn't the first MacBook Pro to have an M series chip, but it was the first to adopt the, not to adopt, but to offer the Pro and the Max variants. So, like I said earlier, there was the 13-inch in the old version in the old chassis, but that just used a standard M1, the same one you'd find in a MacBook Air, and the same one that's in this iPad right here. So I didn't want to do that, so I went for this. But anyways, the chassis itself is made out of aluminum. It's pretty durable. It's in great shape overall. There's a tiny little nick, which I'll have to zoom in on right here. I actually got that recently. My laptop was in my backpack was sitting on a chair, it fell over. You know how it goes. Other than that, this thing has held up great. I treat it well. The amount of wear and tear on it is very low, which is great. You know, some laptops, even if you treat them well, they just don't age very well, especially ones that are made out of plastic. They're going to acquire, you know, nicks and scratches out of nowhere. I actually had a Dell laptop that I got when I was in high school, and I treated it pretty well. It fell off the hinges 2 years into me owning it, which is kind of ridiculous. So obviously no concerns about that here. But the device itself is around 12.5 inches by 8.5 inches, and it weighs around 3.5 pounds, which is great. It's not that heavy. You know, when you look at it and you pick it up, it's going to be heavier than you think it would be, especially if you've seen a lot of and used a lot of MacBook Airs. But still, overall, it's not a very heavy laptop, which is great, especially compared to some of the other stuff I've been working with on this channel, which is great. But I guess we'll talk about the I/O ports real quick. On the left side, you've got the MagSafe 3 charging port, which I love this thing. You know, when Apple was using the USB 3 ports, for the USB-C ports for charging on the previous iterations of MacBooks, there was the issue where you could accidentally pull a MacBook off the table and damage it. Not an issue here. I do like that there is a dedicated charging port. This specific laptop did come with a 96-watt charger, which I still have. I do believe that the 16-inch variant came with a charger that is higher wattage, but I'm not 100% sure. So that is cool. Yeah, this is great. You know, obviously, if you pull at the cord when it's plugged into the Mac, it's going to come out. It's not going to pull your laptop with it, which is great. I do love that. No worries about that. I never personally had any issues with any events like that, but I have heard of stuff like that happening, so it's great that I don't need to worry about that. But next to the MagSafe port, you have two USB-C, my apologies, slash a USB 4 slash Thunderbolt ports. They do support Thunderbolt, but they don't support external graphics cards, which is kind of important, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. Or not important, but if you're a power user, so to speak, you'll care. So those are two things that are nice to have, and you actually can charge the laptop through these ports. I know there's been times where I've forgotten to bring a charger with me, and I wanted to charge my laptop, and so I actually used my iPad charger, which is USB-C, and it did work. It's obviously a lot slower, but it does work. And then next to that, you have a standard headphone microphone jack, which is nice to have. Going on to the other side, on the right side, you've got an HDMI port, which is great. And something important to mention now, because we're talking about an I/O port that supports external video connections, is that this laptop only supports 2 external displays, and there's a little bit of a loophole there, which I'll touch on later, but that kind of sucks, because I like having as many displays as possible, and only being able to use 2 external ones is unfortunate, but you have an HDMI port there, so at least one of the external displays you don't need to use a dongle. Then you've got another USB 4/Thunderbolt port, and then you've got an SD card slot, which is great. So if you have a camera, DSLR, something mirrorless, that's a good thing to have. But what I'm going to do, now that we've gotten the I/O out of the way, is I'm going to open this thing up. It's probably going to turn on. Yes, it is, and it logged in right away with my Apple Watch, which that's a cool feature. But anyways, about the system itself, you've got the pretty large Force Touch trackpad. I've had no issues with that. It feels pretty natural. I think it uses the same haptic technology that was used in stuff like the home button on the iPhone 7, if you remember that. It actually feels like it's moving. It doesn't feel like it's emulating something, which is great. Then you've got the Magic Keyboard, as they call it right here. This was introduced with this model and the 16-inch, and I believe the MacBook Air that released the same year. They moved away from the butterfly keyboard, which I had used, and it didn't feel great, but the big issue there wasn't how it felt, it was its reliability. You would get dust under there, and it would be hard to use keys. Sometimes you wouldn't be able to, or they would just feel really, you'd feel a lot of resistance when you would use them. Which you don't want. It would kind of disrupt the flow of typing, but I'm happy to report there are no issues with that here. Not only are there no issues with typing, the key distance, or the key travel distance, is a lot longer, which is great. It doesn't feel like a mechanical keyboard. I'm not going to say that. And if I do use this for hours at a time, it's going to start to make my fingers a little sore. But for a laptop keyboard, it's great, and it does have a backlight, which of course you would expect out of a $2,500 laptop. But what's great about it is it's not static. It's got a dynamic brightness range, which frankly I've never needed to adjust it, because it adjusts it based on the light in the room, which is great. If there's one thing I hated, not hated, I think that's a strong word to use, but it was just a nuisance with other laptops I used that had backlit keyboards, was that say you were sitting in a room and someone turned the light off, you either wouldn't see the keyboard right away, or the backlight would be way too bright, and so you'd want to adjust it. It does that for you, which is obviously great. But moving up to the display, we have a 16 by 10. I call it almost 4K because the resolution is it's not standardized. I don't want to call it a proprietary resolution, but you're not going to see it on any other display that's not made by Apple. I'll flash it up on the screen because I don't even remember it, but it's just about 4K. And as you can see, you can probably see through the camera, the colors on this thing are great. I've got one of the Windows XP wallpapers. But another interesting thing about this display is that it supports Apple ProMotion, which, if you don't know what that is, that's Apple's variable refresh rate technology. So typically when this thing is on battery, it's going to run at 60 hertz. But I believe you can adjust it so it'll run at the higher refresh rate on battery, but I haven't done that. And then when you plug it in, it's going to run at 120 hertz, which is great. I love seeing that. The high refresh rate is something that you kind of take for granted once you start using it, and then you use a display that doesn't have it, and something just feels off about it. So it kind of spoils you, but it's a great technology to have. Everything's a lot smoother. I like it. It's great. It's kind of made me demand 120 hertz out of whatever new laptop or electronic I get, if it's available. So it is definitely great. And then another thing, if you're not familiar with these laptops that you're probably seeing right now, probably curious about, is the notch up here. I've heard a lot of complaints about this, with reviews, just with comments online on different pages, on different reviews and forums. People don't like this, and I'm going to be honest, I don't think it's a big deal. The menu bar is running through the top anyway, and so if you're not in full screen, using an application full screen, you're hardly going to notice it, because the menu bar is going to be up there, and the menu bar is black half the time, so you don't even know that thing is there. It was a little weird, I want to say, for like a week or two when I bought the machine, but I got used to it pretty quick, and these days I don't even notice it. It's just second nature to me. But in the notch, you obviously have the webcam, which I'm pretty sure they have some sort of Apple-fied name for it. But it's your standard 1080p webcam. It's great. Not great. Great's a strong word. It's sufficient. It works. I've never had any complaints about it. So no worries there. But another issue with, or not another issue with the screen, another thing about the screen that's not as pleasant is the glossiness and what that means for the screen. I actually, before this video, purposely didn't clean the screen because I want to get some shots of what it looks like. You're going to see dust on the screen pretty much all the time. Even if you clean it frequently, it takes a day or two for dust to start accumulating on this thing again, to the point where it's pretty clear whenever there's any bright colors on the screen, which is unfortunate. And I don't want to say it nicks easily, but because of the glossy screen, you see any nicks on the screen pretty easily, which there are a couple. They're not enough to, make me want to replace the screen or get a new laptop, but they are there. I think there's like 2, 3 or 4, maybe just 2, I don't know. So they are there. Not enough to bother me. That's probably the only complaint I have about the screen is the glossiness. I know that's kind of an Apple thing. They do glossy screens for some reason, but it bothers me. But it's definitely not a deal breaker. But anyways, we should probably talk about the internals now, which a big thing about this laptop that I don't like is that literally everything on this laptop is soldered, including the storage and the RAM, which is a big deal that I will get to later. But starting with the base specs, it has an Apple M1 Pro, obviously, which it is the higher binned variant, or it's the non-binned configure or variant of this processor. The base model of this computer came with an 8-core CPU and I believe it was a 14-core GPU. That was the binned variant, and of the CPU cores, 6 of those were performance cores, and 2 of those were efficiency cores. Whereas with this version I have, it's a 10-core CPU with 8 of them being performance cores and 2 of them being efficiency cores, and then the GPU, instead of being a 14-core GPU, is 16 cores. So it's not necessarily a beefed up version of the M1 Pro, more so that the other version is a binned version of the M1 Pro. So it's kind of the version I have is kind of the M1 Pro at its max potential. But something unique about the processor that I should probably talk, or not unique because all Apple laptops are doing this now, but something you probably noticed when I was talking about the processor is that it also has a GPU. This laptop, and pretty much every Apple laptop now, in fact not pretty much everyone, every Apple laptop now uses an APU, not a dedicated GPU. So they're all on the same SoC, which has some benefits, but that obviously means you can't upgrade it. What I have read about the GPU in this machine is that at least in benchmarks, which in real world that's going to be different because of compatibility issues and optimization, in raw performance, the GPU on the M1 Pro is roughly equivalent to, I believe, a 3060 or a 3050 Ti, in synthetic benchmarks. So again, for 2020 or for 2021 when this came out, not terrible, especially for a laptop. But again, you're paying $2,500 for it. You better expect something good, which again, it's not amazing, but it's good enough for what you're probably doing. And if you're doing it for stuff like video editing, which Apple has software for, and it does have onboard media engines, so that it can accomplish those tasks more quickly, it should be able to do that. So it's not exactly going to be a bottleneck, but if you're trying to play modern games, don't expect to be able to do that. Which one, you don't have the processing power for it, and 2, modern games are not going to be compatible with the ARM processor in this thing. That's just how it works. But again, if you go in knowing the fact that you're not going to be playing games, you're not going to be getting 50 series level performance, or the 30 series was the current generation when this came out. You're not going to get 3080, 3070, 3090 performance out of this. You'll be fine. A 3050 Ti in terms of GPU performance for a laptop, especially a premium one, is acceptable. Not great, but acceptable. So I have heard that on the CPU side, the CPU performance of the M1 Pro is roughly equivalent to the base M3, or in between the base M3 and the binned M3 Pro. I've seen a few benchmarks on that, but I'm not exactly 100% sure on that. So there is that reference point there, I guess, if you want to compare the 2021 processors to the not current but only one generational 2023 M3 series processors. So I guess the biggest thing you should take away from this is this thing was pretty powerful in 2021 when it came out, and it's still pretty powerful now. It's not exactly a powerhouse, but it is still pretty powerful. It's going to be good enough for most things you throw at it, unless you're trying to edit a blockbuster movie or play the most modern games, which you're not going to be able to do anyway because of compatibility issues. But it's still running just as well as it was as the day as it was on the day I got it, and I expect it to run pretty well going forward. But that's just the processor and the GPU. I kind of went off on a tangent there. Should probably talk about the storage and the RAM, which, as I said, are soldered, which is very unfortunate. This has 1 terabyte of NVMe. I think Apple calls it flash storage, which something interesting about the storage or the NVMe drive in this model is that it actually is faster than the NVMe drives in the succeeding model. I think that might only apply to the 512 gigabyte variant, which I don't have. But there were some benchmarks that came out that said that when the M2 variant of this machine came out, and I don't know if that's still the case. And from what I read, that seemed to only be the case with the 512 gigabyte variant, and if you had the 1 terabyte variant, the speeds were about the same generation to generation. So I'm not sure what that was about, but I just thought I should bring that up as, I guess, not a plus for this machine because I don't have the 512 gigabyte variant, but just something to note about these machines, because I have heard that brought up before. But anyways, moving on, the RAM, as I said, also soldered, is LPDDR5, and there's 16 gigabytes of it, which that's probably my biggest regret with this laptop, is that I got 16 gigs of RAM. Obviously that's fine right now, and it probably will be for a little while longer, but this was an expensive laptop and I want it to last a long time. So that probably wasn't the best decision to get 16 gigs of RAM. When I was buying this laptop, my real decision when I was choosing the configuration was between whether I was going to get 1 terabyte and 16 gigs of RAM, or I was going to get 32 gigs of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage. And I probably made the wrong decision there because you can't update the RAM on this device, and you can't update the storage too, but you can use external storage and you can't use external RAM. So that's maybe a mistake I made. That's probably one of the biggest regrets I have with buying this machine. But again, it's fine now. I assume it should be fine for the next few years, but that's going to be a concern going forward, and I think that's going to be the biggest bottleneck as this machine ages and continues to age. But especially considering the fact that the RAM is shared between the GPU and the CPU, there's no dedicated video RAM, which again means that's 16 gigs of RAM between the CPU and the GPU. That's not a lot, and that might be an issue going forward. But as of now, it's fine. I assume it'll be fine for the next few years, but going on further than that, I'm not sure. But anyways, that's the basic spec overview of the specs of the machine. Another thing I should probably talk about, because one thing you think about when you are worried about how a laptop ages, is the battery. The battery on this laptop, I want to say so far, has aged pretty well. The battery life overall is pretty good. Or not pretty good, it's great actually. I think I've only had to bring a charger with me 3 or 4 times the entire time I've had this laptop, so that should say something about how long this thing can hold a charge, especially considering the fact I use this thing a lot. Probably more than I should, but I use this thing a lot, and I've only had to charge it a few times. It can last a whole day. Say I have to go to 3 classes a day, and I'm sitting around the campus most of the day. I'm not going home and charging it. It can last pretty much the entire day, which is great with pretty heavy use. So no complaints about the battery life when I got it. In terms of how the battery is aged, weirdly, about a year after I had this laptop, the battery life just kind of nosedived down to 90 for pretty quickly. I'm not quite sure why, but since then it's dropped ever so slowly. It's around 85-86%, so it dropped 10% after a year, and in the succeeding 2 years it's only dropped 4 or 5. That's kind of weird. I don't know why it did that. I probably could have gotten the battery serviced or replaced if I got on it quicker, because it was still in warranty when that happened. It was right on the edge. I probably could have done something about that, but I didn't. And honestly, it's still fine. Even at 85% battery health, I don't really have any issues, which is great. So no complaints there. Even as the battery continues to degrade little by little, it still should be sufficient for what I'm doing, so no major complaints there. So that's probably the one of the biggest concerns that's been assuaded. But in terms of how else the system has aged, as I said, the exterior is in great condition. It's got a little nick on the exterior, and there are a few tiny nicks on the screen and the inside, but honestly, for a 3-year-old laptop, that's pretty reasonable. I don't expect it to get that much worse, barring me accidentally tossing this thing out a window or something like that, or the screen somehow getting damaged. I don't think that's going to happen. Just in terms of normal wear and tear, it's been fine. I think it's going to continue to be fine. So there's really no big concerns there. In terms of how well the internals of the system can handle what I do, and how well I think it's going to continue to handle them going forward, as I said, this thing can do just about anything. Again, if you accept the fact it's not going to play modern games, which is not why you buy a MacBook, and maybe won't be able to do the most complex tasks, you're going to be, when I say most complex, I mean really, really intensive. If you're just doing day-to-day projects like the video editing I do on this, completely fine, and it can handle a lot more than that. If you're fine with accepting that it's not going to be able to do super, super, super complex stuff, and you have standard day-to-day tasks, like maybe you're going to play some light games, maybe you're going to edit some videos, maybe you're going to work on some 3D model, it's going to be perfect for that. And I don't expect that to have any issues, or I don't expect to have any issues with that going forward, probably for the next few years. Again, like I said, I can play games just fine. Video editing is fine. If you sold me this today and told me it was a modern laptop, obviously for less than $2,300, I would believe you. So that's what I have to say about how well it's running and how well it's continuing, how well it ran, how well it's continuing to run, and how well I expect it to continue to run going forward, at least for the next few years. It should still be able to handle pretty much anything that's not super, super extreme without breaking a sweat. So no big complaints there. But I should probably move on and talk about what I don't like about this device, which really isn't a lot, but I'll just rattle the things off real quick and talk about how big of a deal I think it is. So the big one is the 2 display limit. I like to have as many displays as possible, and only being able to use 2 external displays is a little bit crazy, and as far as I'm aware, that restriction is arbitrary. That's not hardware related. Apple just kind of slapped that on there so that if you do want more external displays, you would have to buy the Max variant of their CPU, which I don't know why you need a CPU that's that much faster and that much more expensive, just so you can use a few more external displays. But as I said, there is a loophole there. If you have an iPad, which I do right here, you can use that as an external display, either over wireless or using USB, and that does ignore the 2 display limit. So if you have 2 displays and then you have an iPad, you can technically get 3 displays, but obviously a small iPad is not the same as a full-sized display. So it's an improvement. It's a little bit of a loophole, but it's not perfect. The other thing I would say that I don't want to say that I don't like it, but I guess that I would do differently, is the screen size is a little small for me, but that is a compromise I knew I'd be making when I got a laptop that I wanted to be more portable. So I guess going forward, when I buy my next laptop, whenever that may be, I might get the 16-inch version. Just because I'm not going to be a college student anymore. I'm probably going to be working a pretty sedentary job. That's just the field I expect to be working in. And I won't be using it for work, so it'll mostly just be sitting at home. So I might go with the 16-inch variant, but that's not a huge deal. It's more of just I'd rather do this. It's not something I'm not thinking about how little screen real estate I have all the time. The other thing that bothers me, and that if I stick with Apple, which I intend to going forward, is that the storage and the RAM are not upgradable. There are arguments for soldered RAM. I get it. It's faster. I would prefer it if there was upgradable RAM, but I understand that's just the way the industry's heading. The soldered storage is probably the biggest offense, because storage is one of the things that's the most prone to failure. And if that fails on a laptop like this, say the SSD failed tomorrow, despite the fact everything else is working great, this laptop would effectively be garbage. Sure, a technician could probably solder on new storage, but that's not a sure thing. Apple sure as hell ain't gonna do it. They'd probably just want to replace the whole board, and it would also be pretty expensive too. So it kind of creates an e-waste issue. I don't like it. I guess I'll have to buy more storage when I get my next laptop, which that's kind of how they get you, because Apple charges a lot of money for storage. My suspicion is that that's where a lot of the margin is on these laptops when they sell them. So that's just how they operate. I don't like it. It's not the end of the world, but it's just a scummy thing to do, even for a company. But yeah, the other thing I regret is probably the decision to only go with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Like I said, that might be the biggest bottleneck that'll shorten the lifespan of this machine. Just because even if the CPU is still up to the task, I still have enough storage for everything, and everything else is fine. If I run out of RAM, I'm not gonna be able to do much at a reasonable speed. So I guess when I buy the next laptop, I'm probably gonna try to buy more RAM than I need, because when you buy a premium laptop, especially a Mac, you expect to be using it for a long time, and so future-proofing kind of does make sense in those scenarios. So I guess my plan will be to essentially buy more RAM than I need, acknowledging that I can't upgrade it, and so that I can have that peace of mind that that won't be an issue. And if anything's an issue, it'll be the processor or just the aging of the system itself in terms of its battery and the condition and stuff like that. That will probably be what I do differently in regards to the RAM. But everything I've mostly been saying, other than the display limit, and it's even the display limit you could argue, but other than the soldered RAM and the soldered storage, they're more so issues with the configuration I bought than the system itself. A lot of those could be assuaded if I bought a higher end configuration, which obviously that would be more money. But most of the issues I have with this laptop aren't issues with the laptop. They're issues with the configuration. It's a great laptop. It's built well. It works well. It's going to continue to work well, I assume. I'm expecting to get probably 3 to 4 more years out of this. That's how long I expect it to last before the RAM starts to be an issue with the more intensive tasks. But as of now, it's fine. I think it's going to be fine for a few more years. Next time, like I said, I might get the 16-inch model, or I might actually just buy a MacBook Air, because I don't think I necessarily need the processing power of the Pro processor. Definitely not the Max. If I'm acknowledging that I'm going to stick with the 2 display limit, the base M processors have that same limit. System's going to be cheaper, which is the big thing. It's going to be lighter. They do have a 15-inch variant, which I feel like is a good middle ground. Who knows what they'll have in a few years. But that might be what I do next time. I might get a MacBook Air, a 15-inch MacBook Air, but who knows what I'll be doing with this laptop and what my use case will be in a few years. But if you held a gun to my head and you tell me what's the next laptop you're picking, it would be the 15-inch MacBook Air. But I don't think that's going to be for a while. I actually, when I was making this video, when I was researching for this video, I was just curious, how much can I get for this thing? So I went on the Apple website, and this is actually worth $810 in trade-in credit. I think they're doing a promotion or something, because that seemed pretty high. And then I also went on eBay to see how much it would be worth. And the base models with the 8-core CPU, the 14-core GPU, and less storage, those are going for around $800 to $900, whereas this specific model is going for around $1,000, which for a laptop that's only 3 years old is not as much as I thought it would be, especially for a Mac, because these things tend to hold value. It's depreciated more than I thought. I think that's just due to the fact that the M-series chips just keep getting better, and they're selling a lot of these things. I think there's a few other things that are contributing to that, but still, if I wanted to go and buy a MacBook Air right now for a reasonable price, I could give this thing back to Apple, or I could sell it and I'd be able to put a pretty big dent in the price. But I'm not going to do that, especially considering, yes, the CPUs have gotten a lot better. now to the point that the base M chips are better than the M1 Pro. The GPU, I've seen mixed things. That's a different story. The M1 Pro, especially the non-binned M1 Pro GPU, is still going to be superior, or at least comparable, to the GPUs in the modern M series chips. So I'm definitely not going to do that, but if I wanted to, I could. I'm going to wait for the chips to get better and better, especially I'm going to wait for the GPU to get better, because I don't want to downgrade my GPU when I get a new computer. So yeah, I expect this to last a few more years. I think it's a great laptop overall. It's aged well. The battery's doing great. The system itself is in great condition. Have a few regrets in regard to the configuration I bought, but overall that's more of a me issue than an Apple design issue. So I guess that was just my little rant, not my rant, my little ramblings about how I feel about the 14-inch 2021 MacBook Pro. I guess you could call it a little overview video. I'll probably do more stuff like this in the future, and I'll see you guys next time.